When it comes to my personal thoughts on Red Dead Redemption 2, I kind of want to give it a review, but at the same time, the game's been out since 2018, and I know that there's thousands of reviews and dissections of this game, and also like kind of like viewing each character individually in its own right. But I still wanted to just give you my 2 cents on it. Again, I am gonna criticize it on a few aspects. I'm gonna praise it, especially praise it. So I should tell you how my review of this game is gonna go. And of course, when it comes to character analysis, I'm gonna very briefly bring up just 3 characters that I feel like were the driving force of the narrative. Dutch, Micah, and Arthur. I do want to talk about John, but I feel like that's gonna wait. I'm gonna explain why John's perspective is gonna wait later on in the video. But I want to bring those 3 up, and of course I want to bring up the constructive criticism, some things that I felt like there were flaws in the game. Because even though the game was great, I do feel like it does kind of like present itself to be criticized in some manner. And of course I'm gonna praise it because the game deserves praise. So one of the first things I'm going to be talking about is, of course, the aspects of the characters. The character I want to talk about is, of course, Dutch Vanderlei. Now, I've known Dutch as a character since Red Dead Redemption 1. I did play that game back when it came out in 2010 for the PlayStation 3, and you kind of see him as this broken down person. And to see him in Red Dead Redemption 2 as a enigmatic, full of charisma, this leader of this gang, and how we kind of like talked about wanting to leave everything behind and then like start something new with his gang, kind of like that was his family. And playing Red Dead Redemption 2, I kind of wanted to see how that changed. How did he end up from Red Dead Redemption 2 to Red Dead Redemption 1, and in that perspective. So it was kind of like I knew what was gonna happen, but I wanted to see how it happened, and seeing kind of like his mental decline as kind of like the world started to cave in on him, and he started feeling like he couldn't trust people. And that's the main reason why I wanted to bring up Micah and Arthur, because I felt like Micah, like, I don't know if you guys see those cartoons where you had like the devil and like the angel like whispering into the person's ear, and I feel like that's who Micah and Arthur were. And I felt like as time, like when the story first started, you could feel like he trusted Arthur. Like again, in some aspect, he said like you're more than a son to me. And seeing that kind of decline into the point where he disrespected or didn't take into account Arthur's input, and he valued Micah more toward the end. And I felt like that was kind of like the biggest change in his personality. One of the quotes in the game that kind of perfectly describes what happened to Dutch is, people don't change. People only show you who they really are. And I felt like that perfectly describes the kind of like the pinnacle and the fall of who Dutch Vanderlei was. When it comes to the aspects of Micah, I briefly kind of like described him in the Dutch section, where I felt like he was like the devil in Dutch's shoulder, kind of like whispering these like little lies in order to cloud judgment into what he was doing, not just moving forward, but also cloud judgment on the people that Dutch trusted more, and the people that he knew could kind of like move him away from basically the chaos aspect that was unfolding. I don't like, again, I did say like I hated Micah, but I felt like he was a good character and played parallel to Arthur. Again, it was like if you played the game in High Honor, you would see the parallels between the two. Even though both are Batman, one took it to the extremes and one tried to search for redemption. Do I have some criticisms for how the character was kind of handled? I felt like the character wasn't really fleshed out in a way where didn't really understand why he did things, or why he chose to help Dutch, or why he chose to help the Pinkertons toward the end. I know like he stated it, said like toward the end of the game where it says I'm a survivor, but that doesn't really explain the motives behind everything that was going on. Again, great character. I just felt like he's like a character that could have been fleshed out a little bit more toward the end. When it comes to Arthur, now, when it comes to like, I'm gonna say this, like, if Arthur was a real person, I would want to be his friend, or like if he said something, I would listen. The type of knowledge that he had. But again, as much as I love the character of Arthur, everybody knows, all right? Everybody knows that he is a bad man. It's kind of like that quote he said at the beginning of the game when he was talking to Sadie. He's like, yeah, ma'am, we're bad men, but we're not them. But you have to keep that in mind, is that, Arthur wasn't a saint. He wasn't a saint in like the beginning parts of the game, and he wasn't a saint beforehand, like before the game started. You gotta remember, he was an outlaw. He was somebody who robbed trains, robbed people, robbed banks, etc. He wasn't like the perfect hero, and I think like having flaws like that does kind of bring the appeal into a character. And I mentioned this before, is like people want to romanticize the villains, right? They want to romanticize the outlaws, and it makes sense in some aspects, especially during those times where, like, for example, when you bring up the Pinkertons, they were the law, but they weren't any better. The only difference is that they were on the other side, and for example, Arthur and the band of the gang, they were on the other. That was the only difference. Again, I a little went on there, but when it comes to Arthur himself, his search for redemption is actually something that a lot of people try to search for in their lives. And the question is, can you be forgiving for the actions that you took before? Can you find forgiveness, not just from others, but can you forgive yourself and find a way to leave something behind so that others can try to form something in their future? Kind of like how Arthur tried to do that for John. He's like, I like, for in that aspect, like, Arthur knew that his life was ending, but he wanted to leave something behind. And seeing that, it does kind of like break your heart, because it came to the, like, for the last ride, he came into that acceptance that, yeah, I'm not gonna make it out. And I don't know, it's just the aspects of having a character that understands his mortality, and he fears it. He clearly stated, hey, I'm afraid. And having a character like that, and still continuing to see him evolve, even knowing that, is kind of one of those aspects of a character that it's very hard to fully write in a way that you feel for that character. And I said this during the playthrough, when Arthur died, the game didn't give you enough time to mourn. It didn't give you enough time to actually just stop for a minute, like, to grasp what happened. I felt like they jumped a little bit too soon into the epilogue. I felt like if they were giving you just a little bit extra time, just like to try to grasp what happened to him, I felt like it would have been just a little bit better. But I'm gonna say this, like, even as an adult, and a lot of people will say it's just a game, how can you feel bad, blah blah, how can you feel sad, etc. But in that moment, seeing Arthur pass away in that fashion, I did feel, I felt sad. I felt genuine sadness, which is actually like a big plus for the writers of this game, when you feel something for a fictional character. And like, for me personally, Arthur's gonna go down as probably one of the best protagonists ever written in gaming history. So the supporting cast of Red Dead Redemption 2, I really liked the band of the game. I really did. The supporting cast was great. I just felt like you didn't do a lot of missions with the gang itself. There were some missions, and again, like one of my favorite missions in the entire game was the one you did with Bill, which is the one called Gomorrah, and where you go with two more gang members, and then you go and rob the bank. I think it was Lenny and the girl, I forgot her name. And you go into Valentine and you rob the bank, and then you have Arthur like trying to like open up the safes. That was like a phenomenal mission from beginning to end. It was great. The other mission I liked a lot is the one you did with John and Sean, and when you robbed the bank. Another great mission. But I felt like not a lot of missions were done with the gang, and I felt like having more of those would have been a lot more. It would have hurt more toward the end when the gang kind of betrayed Arthur, and I think having those aspects would have helped out a lot. Again, when it comes to the other supporting characters, Hosea, I think Hosea was featured more. You doing more missions with Hosea than any other gang members, him and John. But when it comes to like the other gang members, I felt like there were some baiting switches that I didn't like. For example, like there was one where like you were talking to Molly, and I'm gonna do something with Molly. I'm gonna interact with Molly because she hardly ever spoke in the game. And like, I'm gonna do something with her, and then suddenly Uncle stepped in, and that was the barn mission where we got caught in the barn, and it suddenly got caught on fire. I don't know, another great mission, but I felt like they did too many of those baiting switches. Where like, oh, I'm gonna talk to Mary Beth. Fine, I'm gonna do a mission with her, but it ended up being something else. Like, I think allowing for more interactions with the gang members would have just been so much better. Just the overall experience, like I said, it would have hurt more at the end when like everything fell apart. Like, oh my god, they're all gone, you know. They did give a few more screen time to, or again, like I said, Hosea, Charles, Sadie. They gave a lot more screen time toward the end of the game, the later chapters. But overall, I felt like they could have done a little bit more to have you put a bond with the whole gang itself. And again, it would have been more impactful toward the end. When it comes to the villains of Red Dead Redemption 2, I'm only going to mention two, and they're the ones I have a complaint with. Alright, the first one's going to be Colm O'Driscoll, and I just didn't like how that kind of ended up. Alright, for a character that you saw twice, you actually saw him twice in the entire game. The first time is when Arthur got captured, and that's when you first saw him, and then the second time is during his execution. And I felt for having a character that impacted more than one character in the game, I felt like having him featured more would have been just so much better. You know, like, okay, he's the leader of a different gang, and he has a significant presence within the area. I felt like a good way to have sent off that character and actually kind of put more life into that character. And it's kind of have like a shootout with the vanilla game. I think that would again I didn't mention this before with the supporting cast, is like they would have had more missions with the gang, and I think having something like this where all the gang got together and they fought off against Colm O'Driscoll would have been like an awesome ending to that villain. And they kind of dropped the ball on that one. It's like you only saw him twice. You only saw him when Arthur got captured and the execution, and I guess he got executed, and that was it. Like, I felt like they could have worked so much with that character. You know, he was a pretty cool looking, intimidating character overall. You know, he was crazy. And the other one I have, like, when it comes to like the villains, the one I have kind of like a complaint with was, like, again, like I mentioned before, I'm not gonna talk about him again, but it's like Micah. You know, I felt like they could have fleshed that character out a little bit more to understand his reasonings for what he did. Aside from those two villains, the rest of the villain cast was they actually, you know, shot it out of the park. The break with lady, you know, the crazy lady at the end at Rhodes, and then the Italian guy. I always forget his name, and the Italian guy. I felt like those characters, like those villains, were like a little bit more fleshed out overall, and it gave you a reason, like, yeah, I gotta take these guys out. Again, there were more villains. I know that, you know, there was that guy in Warma, I believe, the one in the island, but he wasn't really that fleshed out either. But for who he was and the section that we were playing with, it was satisfactory overall, you know. But yeah, when it comes to the villains, I just felt like they definitely did drop the ball on Colm O'Driscoll, and I felt like they could have just fleshed that character out so much more than how they had him presented in the game. Now, just like all good things in life, there are some bad ones. Again, I'm doing this out of love because I really love this game, but sometimes in love you gotta say things that a lot of people are not gonna like, and this is one of those cases. Again, this is constructive criticism. You know, it's not meant to bash the game, but I do feel like there are some things that should be talked about. One of the first things is, of course, the horse. Now, I really like the horse. I think the horse maneuvers a lot more better than the original Red Dead Redemption 1, for sure. But one of the things I kind of hoped with the horse is that it maneuvered just a little bit more smoother than they actually did. I understand it's a horse and they're trying to make it believable that, okay, it's a living animal and it's gonna have some weight. But I felt like having a little bit more ease in control for the horse, and especially how the horse maneuvered around the world, would help out just a little bit more better. There were some sections, especially when you were riding with someone else, it felt really awkward to try to keep up with them while at the same time not hitting the other horse that the companion was in. I know, I understand it's a living animal, it's hard to control, but I believe having a more ease of control, it just makes a much better experience. You have to remember the horse is your main source of transportation, and because of that, you're on the horse a lot. 80% of the game probably, based on the gameplay, you're on that horse a lot. So having it just be a lot more smoother ride would allow the players to kind of enjoy the world itself instead of you trying to fight the mechanics. One of the things I liked from Red Dead Redemption 1 is that if you just hold the X button, I wasn't sure if that was just kind of on me or not, but in Red Dead Redemption 1 you can just hold, for example, the X button. I use a PlayStation. You can hold the X button and then the horse would just follow whatever the road is. So the game has roads kind of basically installed into the world itself. You just hold the X button and the horse just rides, and that's it, and you just follow that line. I felt like that was missing in this game. There were some aspects in the gameplay where the horse did do that, but it was very limited into the areas that it allowed it to. Allowing for that, it just hold the X button and just watch the horse just go off and just follow that track. It would allow players to really take in the world of Red Dead Redemption 2, which is very well made. It was beautiful to look at the sceneries and the world of this game. And I believe allowing the horse to be kind of that driving point for that would have been a lot more better than how they had it implemented within the game. Now, the next thing is the aspects of cleaning your gun, modifying bullets, and creating tonics. Now, I felt like those three mechanics of the game could have been added to the sleeping mechanic and to, for example, when you set up camp, out in the wilderness. They could have, and then for that, it would have given players the incentive to do it. Now, when it comes to cleaning your guns, do you really have to clean your guns in real life? Yeah, you do. That's actually a staple. You use your guns, they're gonna get dirty. Some things are gonna happen. You gotta grease the hinges. And let's say, for example, I'm gonna use the double barrel shotgun as an example here, right? The double barrel shotgun has got the butterfly opening where it opens up. You gotta grease those hinges, and then you gotta clean the barrels. You gotta clean out the residue from inside the barrels, etc., etc. You make sure that the gun is properly working. But I felt like the way that it was implemented in this game is that, one, the way that they clean the guns, that's not how you do it. Secondly, you have to do it to every single gun you're using, and then you see the stats kind of dropping. I felt like if they added that mechanic to the sleeping mechanic, then Arthur was it would give you the option, right? Okay, what do you want to do? Do you want to clean your guns? Do you want to modify bullets, or do you want to create tonics? And then you have a little cutscene of Arthur, being shown cleaning his guns, and then that's it. He cleaned all his guns right before he went to bed. I felt like that would have been a much better implementation of the system than how they had it. And again, I just mentioned the modifying of the bullets. Same thing. Okay, you want to modify bullets before you go to bed, and you see a little cutscene of just Arthur just modifying bullets, and then okay, he wakes up and he made a bunch of bullets. Right, it's all ready for you. Same with the tonics. I felt like adding those three mechanics into the sleeping mechanic for the game would have been a much more better implementation. And again, you're not doing clean your guns, you're not doing one at a time. And again, like I said, it would have incentivized players to use the sleeping mechanic more often and set up camp more often, and then just a much smoother transition instead of doing cleaning each gun individually or modifying bullets individually, tonics, etc. My last little bit of complaint when it comes to this game is, of course, and it's not the only one, all right? I'm not a fan of Grand Theft Auto games, but I do kind of look at the worlds. And one of the main things is it's not a massive complaint, but I just didn't like how empty it felt sometimes. Like I do understand it's the Wild West, and there's a lot of greenery, etc., etc. But I felt like the towns themselves weren't really that populated. Rhodes, Valentine, uh, Bighorn, for example. Like for example, Bighorn, nothing really major happened in that town, and I felt like it was just there. Some major things did happen, but it wasn't enough to justify the town. I think like something that they could have done is like combine Bighorn with Ausenberg, and then have like Bighorn be like where everybody lives, right? Like these are all the bars, the stores, blah blah blah, and then it's all the living quarters. And then Ausenberg is like this working area, because the only big place in Red Dead Redemption 2 was Saint Denis, and that was it. That was like the big settlement. And I believe like having a little bit more expanded settlements within the game would have helped it out just a little bit more. It would help it feel like, oh, this place is actually lived in, instead of like, oh, it just have little things here and there, a few shops, etc. I felt like expanding on the little, again, not fully expanding on the towns, but actually having it feel like, oh, this is a place that's lived in. Again, it does have that feeling, but it mostly feels kind of empty in some aspects. Again, they could have expanded the bayou a little bit and have like the people that lived in the swamps, and having like an actual little city there of people that just like live off like the alligators and whatever lived in the swamps. And I think like the crawfish, I think that's the other thing that was there, and I expanded a little bit on that as well. But aside from that, again, the world is very beautiful, but in some aspects, sometimes it did feel a little bit too empty. Now, one more thing I am going to criticize is, of course, the epilogue. Like, personally, for me, I feel like you could have cut out like a third of it, and it wouldn't have made a difference. I feel like starting off the epilogue, it was a little too drawn out. I think having John, Abigail, and Jack like kind of just riding toward the ranch at the very beginning, and just like, oh, I want to learn how to be a rancher and be a, one day own my own ranch, etc. Like, cause like you could have had it that Abigail and John had talked about that. They're like, oh, I gotta learn how to be a rancher. Let me get a job at a ranch, and then I'll learn what I need to know, and then we'll get our own ranch. And then you're gonna have that aspect of John learning how to do that, and then you have the aspect of like Abigail leaving, and then John trying to change himself, and then him buying the ranch at Blackwater, and meeting Uncle again and Charles, and then having them build the house. I think that's one of the best actions in the game. Also, it's like having them build that house. I think that was cool, and then having them just have a good time with it. The next thing I'm gonna complain about is, of course, the aspects of the Skinners. I felt like they weren't really fleshed out, and a perfect way that they could have fleshed that out is like have them be introduced in that first part of the epilogue, and then have them be kind of like the main enemies of it. And then as you're like taking them out and you're trying to find out who their leader is, that's where you find Cleet, for example, right? You find Cleet, and it's like, oh, where's Micah? Blah blah. And like, well, I don't know where he is, but I can tell you like he's sergeants or like he's lieutenants. So I can tell you where one of them is, and then that's how epilogue part 2 would have started in that respect. It's like, okay, now we're hunting these guys down, trying to find Micah, and then it would have, one, fleshed out the Skinners, and two, it would have started the aspect of let's find Micah. Because like once that instead of like, oh, we know where Micah is, it kind of just like rushed to it. All right, it wasn't like, oh, we're doing all this trying to find him. It's just like, okay, he's up in the mountains. Okay, cool. It's like I feel like they could have fleshed that out a little bit more better, so that when you had that confrontation up in the mountains, which by the way was pretty cool, but I felt it would have been like a lot more impactful. Like, okay, we're going there. We know where he is. We're marching up there, and then that would have been more impactful than how they had to set it up, where it's just like sudden. Oh, I know where Micah is. Let's take off. It was weird. it just felt weird. But overall, I felt like I said, you could have cut out like a third of it, and it still would have been great if they had it had to be more fluid, and then just had to be a lot more kind of like engaging with the world that was there. Because the epilogue wasn't very long. I think in total it was like 4 hours, and then that was it. Now I'm gonna sing its praises. The good part, right? Now, when it comes to Red Dead Redemption 2, it is, I'm gonna say, 3 times longer. About 3 times longer than the original. The original one's about 20 hours long. This one was 60. At least I clocked in 60. All right, I did a lot more stuff. And again, I'm gonna say this right now, like what you guys saw in the playthrough was like a third of like the overall playtime. So if you guys ever decide to play Red Dead Redemption 2, let's just say you have a lot to look forward to if you ever decide to pick up the game. Again, the game came out 2018. Probably a lot of you already played it, and you guys are only here to listen to my stupid opinion. But let's just say, like, if you guys haven't played it, you have a lot to look forward to if you ever decide to pick it up. Now, singing its praises, of course, when it comes to the graphics, I did play on the PlayStation 4, and I was still very impressed. You know, I haven't experienced PlayStation 5 graphics. I don't have it. I don't have that console, but even the PlayStation 4, the game's graphics were far, you know, above and beyond than what I was expecting. The game looked great. All right. When it came to the gameplay, the gunplay of the game was very smooth. I did talk about the complaints about the cleaning the guns aspect, but the actual using of the guns and aiming the guns and going through the shootouts felt very smooth. I think they did that very well in this game. The other aspects that I really liked about the game itself were actually just like the interactions that you had with the people and the world. Again, I wish there were more interactions with specific characters within the game, but overall I felt like the interactions overall outweighed it. I just felt like the world was alive in that respect, just from the wilderness and talk to the people, the towns, and everything that was going on and everything you could do. I felt like, yeah, this is like a world that people are here and people live here, and I felt like that was a big plus to the game. About the overall story of it, though, I think that's like its biggest strong point. Again, I mentioned this in the author section, and where I felt like they did a good job of humanizing the characters, even the villains. I think there were some villains that they didn't humanize so well. I did complain about Colmore Driscoll, and I stand by that. But I felt like everyone else was very humanized. Like like even the little interactions you had with some of the members of the gang, you felt like they were human. You know, they felt like they felt something, like they had something to say, or maybe they didn't like how things were going, and you kind of felt that in a way. You know, for example, Bill was always being made fun of, and he always brought it up. Why am I being treated like trash when Arthur screws up? Nobody bats an eye, you know. And that kind of tells you a little bit about him, you know. And similar to Javier, like Javier was like, he was like this really chill dude. It's like, yeah, let's go fishing and blah blah, you know. I felt like they did a good job of humanizing the characters in the overall story, to the point where you actually did feel. Again, I wish they fleshed out those characters a little bit more, but in the terms for like Arthur, Sadie, Charles, John, etc., you felt something for those characters, and you wanted to see them ride off into the sunset. And again, that's like I did mention this before, it's like a good indicator of how good the story was written. Again, the moment you feel like that you feel something for a character when they're fictional, whether you like the character or not, it's a testament to how well those characters were written. Now, I kind of rumbled on too much, and I didn't want to make this review more longer than it needed to be. It's not really a review at all. It's just like my own personal thoughts on how I felt like the game was kind of like structured overall. Again, I'm not a personal reviewer or a professional reviewer. I'm not fancy with, like, you know, how editing, etc. You guys noticed that already. So again, I'm not gonna give it like a score. Instead, I'm gonna give you my recommendation. Should you play Red Dead Redemption 2 in 2023? The answer is sounding yes. Even though the game was released in 2018, it holds up. It actually holds up really well. I'm actually looking forward to what, you know, the team of Red Dead Redemption is gonna come up with next. If you ask me personally, like how I feel like they should continue it, I feel like if they have it in an era where the Outlaws are done, I feel like they should have like a bounty hunter game, and where like they're taking out like the Outlaws, etc. It would be a very tragic game overall, because again, kind of like looking at the Bandit gang, where you love those characters, and then suddenly you have a bounty hunter hunting them down. Well, not the Bandit gang, but like you have people that are like similar to the Bandit gang, and you have a bounty hunter. Like, I feel like a step in that direction would make it a lot more tragic overall. Again, I'm not gonna give it a review like I just said right now. My review is that yes, you should play Red Dead Redemption 2 if you guys haven't. And as to what I'll be doing in the future, I'm gonna be playing Red Dead Redemption 1, So look forward to that one. And that's the main reason why they want to talk about John overall. I feel like having his story told at the end of that game is going to be a lot more better than me saying something now and then saying it again, like double dipping on that aspect. But I feel like having his analysis, like semi-analysis, being done at the end of that game is going to be a lot more better. Again, I want to thank everybody who, watched this review, and to everybody who watched the playthrough. I really want to thank you. Again, this is my first full playthrough in this channel, and I kind of wanted to start off strong, and I want to start off with a good game, and I definitely chose a great game. So again, I want to thank you guys. Look forward to Red Dead Redemption 1 coming up, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care, guys.